lively panel discussion has been made possible by Imperial. Ladies and gentlemen, Derek Watts.
A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our panel discussion at the SAPIC's 39th Annual Conference. My name is Derek Watts. I say it loudly because a lot of people these days think I'm Rian Kruiwagen. But he looks a lot younger, he's got no grey hair, his eyes are twinkly blue. And if you're still wondering about this long stretch of misery here at the podium, I present a light entertainment program on Sunday nights. I don't think there's anything funny about that. Who watched last night? Nobody. I think my job is in jeopardy. Okay. But as my wife says, it's not all about me. So, trends and tribulations. What we've learned and what we need to know about our supply chains to thrive. Now, there's an interactive digital platform, which you see there. Please join the conversation. And send us some questions. I think you can probably do a lot better than me with some of your questions, and we'll put them up on screen and test the team. Okay, everybody know how that works? Look, if you can work Tinder, you can work this. But if you want any help, especially with Tinder, with working the interactive, what you call it, the interactive conversation, just come and see me, or one of our specialists. Right, it's time to get down to business unusual, the panel brought to you by Imperial Logistics. And let's meet the team who are from home and abroad. First of all, Bronwyn Engelbrecht, Strategic Sourcing Manager, the House of Busby. And come right up here. Nice to see you, Bronwyn. Steve Georgievich, who leads the Supply Chain Transformation Organization within Boeing's Global Services and Support Supply Chain. Welcome, Steve. Doug Kent, Managing Director in PwC's Advisory Practice, and that's in California. Tsepo Makalani, Vice President Supply Chain, Sasol Energy. Bradley Nitschke, Head of Supply Chain, Woolworths, South Africa. And Kobus Rousseau, Chief Strategy Officer, Imperial Logistics. Thanks to our team. Take a seat and relax. I was truly overwhelmed by Sean's talk. I think a lot of you know more than I do about the way the world is changing. I used to work for Xerox in London, and they developed what is called the telecopier. And this telecopier meant that you could have a contract in London, and it would be telecopied to somebody in Birmingham. And I guess was the forerunner to the fax. And at the time, I just thought, life can't get any more advanced than this. What is happening to the world? Wow, this is just incredible. I thought it was magic. And it's not that I'm old. I think these days we call it chronologically gifted. But life is advancing at an incredible rate, let's just face it. And we switch on our TVs this morning, and what do we see? More terror on London streets. The war on terror continues. But recently, if you watched Carte Blanche, you would have seen the program which showed that the next war will actually be fought over the internet. It'll be a digital war, disrupting systems. And I don't think the corporate sector will be immune to it, and I think obviously it's happening already, I would think, in some space. There are probably examples you can tell us about. So let's start with Doug. And please, you've got carte blanche to chip in at any time. These people are hungry for information, so just chip in. We've got to keep it punchy and brief. But Doug, are we taking that threat seriously enough about disruption of systems in the corporate sector? Supply chains?
Well, I don't think we need any more sobering examples of what's happening relative to cybersecurity, the least of which, of course, is the U.S. election process. But absolutely, I think as we look at harnessing big data for supply chain purposes, we have to be sure that, of course, that we're protecting that data as well. Any breach of any sort of cybersecurity across the supply chain enterprise is brand destroying very quickly, which means the valuation of that product or service goes down. So if you're not worried about it, you certainly should be.
Are we doing enough about it? Anybody like to pick that up? Steve?
Let's see.
Because you're in one of those vulnerable airspaces, so to speak?
Absolutely. You know, it's similar, I guess you could say, to the war on terrorism in terms of at some point it becomes deteriorating the business if you over-respond. I can say within Boeing we spend tens of millions, probably hundreds of millions of dollars protecting our data, but I wouldn't say that I would say any corporation would have to say that we're vulnerable. So I think, and you know, it's kind of fascinating because, you know, a lot of the leaks now you see happen through social media. They happen through, you know, there's just about anywhere today that the wall has breaches within it. Are we taking it seriously enough? I think most of us in this room are paranoid about it, but I don't know that we could do much more than we do today.
Okay, I mean, the British Airways example, they put down to, what, a power failure or something, but I think at the time people thought that could have been some disruption. Corbus, are we doing enough locally?
I think we, in terms of protecting data, we often get caught in thinking inside the firewall, and organizations develop and think the way that organizations develop and think. And we often don't project what's happening outside the firewall in this world of convenience and using apps, that how you can actually apply that, but for organizations. So I think sometimes we think, but we think about the wrong way about what we could do and how do we protect data and how do we use data. So I think there's a challenge in our own thinking process that we actually have to apply.
Okay, let me read a statement to you. More and more digital components such as the Internet of Things, robotics and AI will find their way onto digital platforms, okay? And that'll produce impressive results, especially in distribution centers and fulfillment centers. But, and this is the point, creating digital supply chains requires a journey, not a project, so we will only see incremental improvements. Bramwell, would you agree?
Absolutely. I think that our supply chains are going to get quicker. I think they're going to get more complex. I think we're going to have to be agile. I think Darwin said it best, that if you don't adapt, you won't survive. And we're going to have to adapt to that, and we're going to have to protect ourselves, especially some of us that are in the branded industry. We're going to have to protect ourselves better, but we can't stop. It's just going to have to continue.
But Bradley, in terms of incremental improvements, do you agree with that, or do you think that's a bit of a sort of understatement?
I think for the large part, we'll most likely see a mix of incremental improvements. But certainly I think all of us are challenged to increase the amount of time and money we're spending on adapting. And I think through that we'll find opportunities for step changing. And we had a good discussion the other day on the topic, and one of the key thoughts for me was that if you want to defend yourself from disruption from external sources, you need to be disrupting from inside your organization. And so that speaks to me about creating step change within your own environment.
Right, Seb, I've got one for you here. The first rule of any technology used in a business is that automation applied to an efficient operation will magnify the efficiency. The second is that automation applied to an inefficient operation will magnify the inefficiency. Do you think that's true?
That is true. But can I just put a disclaimer? I've been dying to say this. As a supply chain professional, I've always said I don't want to be on carte blanche for the wrong reasons.
So you're relieved that...
no, I've been dying to say it.
Yeah. But you never know if Devi is just in the wings there.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. No,
Back to your question, Derek,
yeah.
I think it has to be fit for purpose. I mean, most of us jumped into this digital supply chain, got nice softwares, ERP systems, but we don't even get to use 50% of those stuff. So it's always good that you make it fit for purpose. It's a journey, as our panelists said, and make sure it works for you and delivers value, else to just add more inefficiency in your processes.
Kobus?
Yeah, I think the same storyline is the old process plus new technology equals expensive old process, and that's a major threat where the not changing what we do or changing the people that do it and throwing technology at it is a bit like trying to explain to a chronologically advanced person, like I tried to do with my mother yesterday, how she should use the APSA app on her phone. She has no desire to understand that. She actually goes to the bank to get the bank statement. And in there is her journey, and we must respect that. But in organizations, you have to change the process. Otherwise, you just do the wrong things faster.
Doug, overseas perspective?
Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, if you just reflect on what Sean just showed us, right? Let's just put it in the framework of sexy, right? I mean, this is sexy stuff. Probably has more potential to transform a supply chain than any of us have ever seen. But why is it a journey and why are we seeing incremental improvements? I think because for the first time ever, the technology is not hindering our ability to adapt, right? It's our people. So what has to happen is you got to take a step back a little bit and say, I've got all these new technologies which are available to me, but what's my digital strategy? If you don't have the digital strategy, what you're doing is adopting a bunch of sexy things without a way to sort of weave these together for overall improvement. So I think what we're going to see is a few years of people taking one step back and saying, I've got a lot of things available to me. Which are the ones that are going to transform my business? Therefore, challenging the organization to have a digital strategy and the people who can adapt to that.
Steve?
Similar to what Doug just said, I think that that all change is incremental. That even though we have all these major disruptors in the market, every business won't change overnight and won't need to change overnight. And I think one of the biggest problems that people will face is what is the right pace of transformation that I need to do? Because on this digital journey is a good example. That starting with how do I digitize, what's my digital strategy, how do I digitize my products? It's a long journey. I can say again from my industry, it's not reached the digital era. The products that we deliver are still designed and developed in what I would consider to be the very conventional way. And it's going to take some time before that revolution will really kind of take hold and transform our industry.
Yeah, moving on to sustainability, maybe Bradley, you can come in. They say the supply chain is the new frontier in environmental responsibility, okay? An area rich in opportunity that remains mostly unexplored, where pathfinders are starting to show others the value that can be found. Does this mean much to you?
Absolutely. Derek, I think our understanding of sustainability has moved on quite substantially in the world. We understand these days that solving for climate change is very much integrated with solving for other human problems. And in order to solve for climate change, we really need to look at our impact that our supply chains are having. And instead of taking a mindset that says, how can we limit our footprint, the impact of our footprint on our environment, we should rather be looking at opportunities to leverage our footprint for creating gain for the world, and that's for climate change and for people. Climate change is very much a problem we're trying to solve for humanity, and so trying to look at it in isolation from solving education or social development or hunger or some of the other problems we have as humanity is foolish. And certainly as the people sitting in this room who run large supply chains, we should be of the mindset that we have a huge opportunity to leverage what we have under our control to further our sustainability goals.
Any other thoughts?
Maybe just on the reshoring aspect. So I think this is really interesting. So, And it certainly will help in the sustainability, since a lot of our issues with, climate, et cetera, are certainly related to transport. So the ability for us to be able to manufacture in the same region of demand is really enticing and makes me maybe optimistically hopeful that we're going to be able to live the hype of having a green supply chain. Not one that is just a marketing concept where we say we want to be sustainable, but the only time we become sustainable is when it financially makes sense. They've actually lived the words, and I think the reshoring efforts could certainly give us that opportunity.
Seppo, you were going to come in there.
Yes, I also want to come in. I mean, we make chemicals and fuels, so safety, health, and environment is quite key for us. And I think what's changing now is that the consumers and the lobbyists are actually the ones who are now pushing for sustainability in our processes as well. It's not just driven by the organizations, but people out there, they're demanding it now.
Okay, but do you think it's fair to say that sustainability is something that only really comes to the fore, or can I say is affected by the economic climate? That too many businesses abandon the objective of greening their operations when the cost pressures mount? First thing to go, Steve?
So, be completely transparent, I absolutely believe that's the case. I mean, when you, because, and as Douglas just hit on, the reshoring efforts and some of those things, hopefully they create the right balance that allow companies to not erode the expectations of the business. The U.S. businesses are driven by the market, although, one of the things, not to get to the politics, but if you guys probably know this, that the U.S. did not sign up to the Paris Accord. Shocking, right? But you see U.S. businesses now starting to pull themselves back or make public statements about, even some states are signing up to legislation that says we will still abide by the Accord at a state level. So I think it is one of the first things to go out the door, but I think most companies have to get the brand association with the sustainability piece, and then it becomes something that I think maybe the market will be more attracted to. But similar to other areas, some things get cut really quick when the chips are down, and a business is ultimately responsible to its employees and to the consumers and everyone that's a participant in that business. So unfortunately, I think that is typically the case. Sustainability is one of the areas that probably gets hacked at first.
Right. Are you getting into the conversation? Do we have any questions?
Sorry, Derek, can I just jump in there on the sustainability thing? Because
Yeah.
I'm watching Lorraine Jenks in front here, and she's grimacing by what we're saying. And really, research shows us that the millennials is our new wave of consumers. And millennials are wanting to save the planet.
Yes.
And they want to be creative, and they are not going to buy our products unless we are green. They're not going to do it. You can see hemp shops popping up all over, and Lorraine, I'm sorry, I've started a compost heap, but I can't wear hemp. I've tried, I can't do it. But the millennials will want to do it. They're going to want to have hemp linen. They're going to want to do that. And we, as supply chain people, are going to have to listen to our consumers, and a consumer is a very different thing to a client.
Yes.
A client buys a service, a consumer consumes what we put out in the market, and they are starting to dictate to us what we have. And green and sustainability is at the core of what the next wave is going to be. Baby boomers are now buying, chronologically appropriate products from Dis-Chem. But, the millennials aren't. They're looking for green stuff.
And can I just add on to that? Yeah, so the last 2 days we had an executive summit, and a big part of the conversation was the role of the supply chain executive, particularly in the C-suite. And I think that part of that, so, because I completely agree with your perspective, but really when you talk about who's going to green the business, it's going to be the supply chain people.
Yeah.
And our voice to the senior executives, to the CEOs, in that C-suite's position has to be that, hey, sustainability is important. We own the keys to it. We're going to have to come up with the solutions to it. And I think that means that we've got to be much less passive, much more aggressive, and much more oriented towards driving the business in that direction.
Derek, can I just add to that? I
Sure.
think for our two American colleagues, by the way, we're still hoping that the letter from the South African government to your president will swing his decision on the Thursday.
Good luck with that.
Tell them use Twitter is better, it's more effective.
I think the green part of sustainability, and I think Bradley raised a much broader perspective, but the green part, the economics is favorable, and maybe it's because our fossil fuels are expensive, our electricity is expensive. But the other benefit is the discipline it creates. It doesn't take much effort to introduce recycling, but it's hugely beneficial.
Yes.
The benefits of fuel consumption measurement, the benefits of understanding electricity consumption, and I certainly think in our market, creating the awareness, creating the measurement, and therefore you end up saving money while you're saving the planet is real. So I certainly wouldn't dismiss it as when the going gets tough, everybody stops going green.
Okay, yeah.
For us, there's huge opportunities and a mindset that actually is beneficial both economically and then environmentally.
Just to conclude on that, and Bronwyn, maybe you'd like to just extend what you were saying, because like social networks, Facebook, LinkedIn, business networks house incredible amounts of insights and data. So the thought is that procurement will unleash the power of this information to optimize supply chain decisions and accelerate innovation and growth. Is that in line with what you're saying?
Absolutely, absolutely. So social media at the moment is driving everything that we do. It's making us think differently about the way we move our product. It's making us think differently about the way we source our product. It's making us think differently about all of that stuff. And it's just the way we have to go, and we have to adapt to it.
Any other points? Let's go to the questions from the delegates, if we can go back to those. I think the top one was, many within the business community regard procurement and supply chain management functions as among the least adaptive to technological change. Wow.
Wow.
That's sad. I absolutely would absolutely disagree. I think that we're under a transformation right now as a profession. So, and we talked about this quite a lot over the last couple of days in the executive summit. So, it used to be that the supply chain was looked to be the cost reduction people,
Yes.
right? As opposed to the revenue generating people. And I think most of our organizations are starting to see that transform. And we're the organization that has the ability, because we own so much of what happens inside of the organization, we have the ability to turn that around and not be the whipping post and the guys who are the cost saving and et cetera, but look at the ones who can build the capability that will generate revenue and generate profit. So I absolutely think we are adaptive, and I think that the way in which we're going to adapt is to utilize new technologies, but we have to be selective, right? We have to find the technologies that will drive that differential.
Okay, let's just pick up, and Sepp, if you can just come in here. I mean, okay, supply chains are really on executive agendas these days, and senior leaders view their supply chains generally as cost centers, though, don't they? And push for continuous cost reductions. This is the point, isn't it? Now, is it true that we won't see widespread gains until business executives learn to appreciate the contributions of supply chains as business value drivers, really, as Doug was saying? Is this the point?
Look, I think we're evolving from that sentiment. And I think probably in the last 15 to 20 years, supply chain has gotten a seat at the executive table now. And business leaders, they sit more as a profit center versus just a cost center. More of a collaborative value unlocker with suppliers as well. So we are putting money on the table now. But I think leadership needs to understand what we can do. And we as supply chain professionals must be vocal, must demonstrate exactly the value that we bring to the table. It mustn't just be talk and talk. It must be talk, deliver on the results. Then they can feel it.
Okay, now, you might have gathered I'm not a total expert in this field, but Bradley, is there really that gap? I mean, I would have thought, executives, senior people would just realize the value. It wouldn't be a problem in today's age, but it still is.
I think it still is, Derek, and I think it differs across various sectors. And I think it stems from the fact that supply chain traditionally has been quite transactional. We high process and we execute those processes, and often it's said that if things are going well, you don't hear from your supply chain people, right? So you only hear from them when something's going wrong. And I think that's shifted, as Chepo said, over the last number of years. We've really started being seen as a strategic enabler of transformation. And it's not uncommon these days to find supply chain organizations that have rather large transformation units. Because as that shifts, we also have to start thinking about the different types of skill sets we need in order to really be that strategic partner or enabler within the business.
Steve, would you say that even in the States and Europe, there's still that big sort of gap between the executives not realizing the value of supply chains?
I think the tide has turned. I'm sure there is a fair amount of, I think, instances where the supply chain guy, we were talking again at the executive summit, and the typical kind of conversation in the C-suite again is, first of all, did you get my parts, or did you get the deal that I asked you to get with that supplier? And that's still our jobs, right? So that doesn't go without saying. But one of the things that there's a strong recognition that I see now is that probably the most understanding of the customer is the supply chain. The most understanding of the supply base is the supply chain. The most understanding of what drives price is the supply chain, or at least the cost, but even price sensitivity. Those things, the supply chain person has that kind of insight. Our biggest challenge is we don't speak the language of the executive board. So, how do we speak in terms of finance, in the marketing speak? How do we speak in a way that we're recognized as those individuals that really can contribute to the direction of the business? But and I was telling the folks at the executive summit, I'm a very loud person, so I don't hesitate to make my voice heard. And I think we all should feel that confident, and we need to learn the language of the boardroom so that we can have that kind of influence. But if you do, I think there's a strong respect for that knowledge that the supply chain has.
Brahman, you were nodding your head a little bit there. Do you see this language of the boardroom having to be bridged? And
It's a challenge all the time. And only recently, in the last, I don't know, Kobus, you can help me here, maybe in the last 10 years, that there's been supply chain executives that actually sit on the board. Before, they were just the guys in the DC, in the dark dungeon that you went downstairs to when something went missing. And I've got this saying, I always say, they container didn't arrive here with fairies. There was a significant amount of process that went into it, and there was people working really hard. There's people working to get the density levels up so that your landed cost is actually palpable for you, so that at the end of the year when you, merchandiser, get your bonus because you've made your profits. We did that. You didn't do that. You chose something that was pretty, that hopefully a retailer was going to buy, and I'm winking at you. And that's what you did. But the fairies didn't fly it over here and make it land all in a nice way.
No, but we're laughing. But I mean, it's probably one of the most important things we can chat about today, because if you haven't got that support, what does it mean? I mean, Kobus, this is a huge problem that I'm hearing here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Brandon's even shorter than that. And I think the rate of change is accelerated. But maybe coming back to the point Doug made earlier about technology, I think the opportunity for us as supply chain professionals is that a lot of these things shouldn't be threatening.
Yes.
It should actually, the technology change, disruption, because it allows us to move from some of the mundane into the value added. So I really believe if we use that effectively, the energy and time that we historically have spent on sorting out the issues, just staying ahead of the game, if you can change that dynamic into actually adding value, or being recognized to add value, I think that's a great opportunity for supply chain.
Just changing, to Kobus's point, just changing the conversation, right? Let's not have a discussion with sales based on emotion. Let's have a discussion based on facts, right? We have the technology to bring information into insight. To have a discussion with the salesperson and say, if you want to increase your on-time delivery commitment to your customer by 2%, this is the amount of inventory investment that it's going to take to derive that improvement. Are you willing to make that trade-off? Let's have a discussion based upon the fact. We shouldn't be sitting in competition with our own functional units for that. So we have now the opportunity to bring the discussion to another level, to bring a discussion that we can speak the language of our counterparts. And that insight is really what's changing the game.
Well, I'm sure if the commission's only given when the product's delivered, then they might be more
Or
enthusiastic.
just pay them on inventory performance and see what happens.
But what I do like about the fact that this is not in boardrooms and it's taken such a long time is that we have this community over here. And supply chain people, you'll know, 'cause from all different communities, we'll talk to one another. We'll tell each other our deepest, darkest secrets. It's not like we have trade
Really?
secrets. So we get together, and it doesn't matter whether we're all from retail. So, well, are you struggling? Yeah, I'm struggling. Yeah, let's make it better. So the supply chain community in this country, I think, is very strong, and we network well together. So we've created our own little boardroom outside of the boardroom, if that makes sense, which is great. But it does have to go back to the boardroom, and I think they don't understand us half the time, because we do talk a different language. And I also think we bring a lot of the innovation, and we're bringing a lot of these way out there ideas, which for us is something we've got to think about. But for the rest of the board, I don't know.
So
I don't know if it's that important for them.
without laboring the point, but I think there's an element where we really have to understand the marketing speak, the finance speak. As recently as 6 weeks back, I actually launched a program within my supply chain teams to say we need to go in a customer centricity course. Let's understand exactly who is our customer, not our internal clients, but the actual consumer. What does he need? What is the voice of the customer? And in all that we do, let's think of him all the time.
Well, that is the dimension we're leading to now. Can you carry on with that? Or maybe Bronwyn wants to pick it up. In these competitive and complex times, is it companies that can effectively build and nurture great partnerships that will flourish in the coming years, looking at customer centricity?
So this is something I'm so passionate about. So I know one of the other questions you're going to come to is, what was the next big thing in supply chain that didn't happen?
Yes. How did you know that? So it's fairies. No, it's the fairies,
I
Bronwyn.
know I'm blonde, I know I'm the only girl, but I know you're going to ask that.
No.
And what it was collaboration. We have been talking about collaboration that I want to, puke in a bucket. Kate Stubbs here from Barlow World. From the time she's done supply chain foresight, we have been talking about collaboration, and we have never really gripped it and made it our own. And in the demand supply chain, you've got to have four things. It's reliability, you've got to react, you've got to anticipate, so those are your internal processes. Then you have to have collaboration, and then you have to have execution. And we're so good at execution, and we're so good at all the other things, but the minute we've got to collaborate, the minute we've got to open our kimonos, all of a sudden we feel like we've got to keep secrets, and we can't tell anybody because now it's a chess game, and I want to be one up on you, and I just want you to be my partner. I want you to go through this process with me, through thick and thin, and if we've got to go for marriage counseling, then we'll go for marriage counseling. But if I choose you, and if you fit my business, and you fit my culture, and you have what I need, let's work through it together. And we don't do that. We're so disloyal to our service providers. I don't know if it's the same
Who's as
overseas,
emotional as
but
Bronwyn about opening their kimonos? I mean,
So-
I'm sorry,
and I
we're not
do.
ignoring you on the left-hand side there. I feel that we're a little bit split here, but you're watching on the screen there. Okay. But who's emotional about, is Bronwyn about this partnership and opening kimonos?
Passionate.
I'm not so sure about the marriage counseling, but I certainly share the enthusiasm regarding partners, and an often used and overused term is end-to-end supply chains and value chains, and they're often used interchangeably. In running what we operate for our businesses, our direct operations, there comes a time at which you've optimized your processes, you've taken out the cost, you've improved as much as you can improve, and any further value really comes from the stuff that lies between you and other stakeholders. And those are the things to go after. From just a maturity curve perspective, that's the next step for you. And I think all of us are challenged in our supply chains as to how to do that. But it's really, I think, a big word for me there is around creating partnerships with members of that value chain. And looking for opportunities to co-create value sitting between our businesses.
I think just maybe to add, so I don't think any of us would ever question that collaborative networks are key to having agility in the supply chain.
Yes.
So if those collaborative networks are not working correctly, we don't have the trust, we're not having the conversation, we're not sharing insights, etc., we quickly move from agile to fragile. So it's very, very important that we work hard and not just the speak, right? The overused collaboration. You're my partner until we negotiate a contract, and then you're suddenly a customer and a supplier. But we really live the word about collaboration. I think a lot of that is about sharing data amongst us, sharing the insights, getting closer to the customer, understanding our consumer, respecting each other's challenges. Looking at the opportunities to work better together, all of those things have to happen in order to keep agile and not become fragile.
Because lean was always the sort of byword, wasn't it?
Yes.
But now you've got to be agile and flexible and just move with the times. Is it important to be flexible and interactive, ensuring high quality delivery? I guess that is the bottom line, isn't it?
Well, they're not diametrically opposed, right?
Right.
I mean,
No.
Right.
a lot of agility comes with becoming more lean. I think when we talk about being lean and identifying waste, et cetera, again, if you take a look at those who have been successful in their lean journeys, they've shared that lean concept, that identification of waste, et cetera, across the entire enterprise.
Yes.
So just take 2 seconds and ask yourself, for those who are part of the supply chain community, and say, am I a good customer? Sometimes we look at our supply base and you're a bad supplier, but you got to sometimes turn the mirror around and say, am I a good customer?
Good question, yeah. I mean, Derek, if I
Sebo?
should just add to Doug as well, I'm not sure how many of you know your suppliers, and if you're missing that, you're actually losing or leaving value on the table. By you understanding who's your suppliers, you can see exactly where the innovation opportunities could be to really unlock your cost efficiency. But also on the other side of the customer, do you know who's your customer's customer? I mean, we're mostly B2B. We sell raw products to other companies who make the end product. But if I don't know who's the customer in the end, I will never really get to do more innovation, collaborate properly so that I unlock value as well.
I guess a lot of this comes down to listening, especially to customers, because my wife says that I just don't listen. I think that's what she said. Sorry. Questions from the floor. Have you been thinking and sending in your questions? Let's have a look, and maybe you can decide if some of these, well, we've had that one. No, hold it. BBBEE, do we think that's a component of sustainability? Anybody got a thought there?
Sorry, Derek, what's that?
BE.
BE. Oh, certainly. I was saying earlier that sustainability, a modern view of sustainability, that it's interwoven, a number of elements are interwoven, and some of those are what's happening in society, what's happening with people, wellness and health, as well as climate. And certainly in the South African context, economic transformation is a big part of that. And certainly, from our organization, it's a big part of our sustainability objective is driving out transformation. One of the points I made earlier on sustainability was that you should not create a situation where trying to solve climate change competes with other important objectives, and rather you should look at these as an integrated part of a whole. So I think certainly as South Africans, BE is something that should be high on our agenda and a big part and parcel of our sustainability goals.
I would think so.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. I also agree with that. it's more so around the localization effect. You know, how do you localize the economy? You know, your procurement. It's your first line communities. We're based in Sasolburg and in Secunda, where the people are saying they forever see suppliers from Gauteng coming to Mpumalanga to do business, but they don't see the locals being absorbed into jobs. So that poses a risk to us, because as soon as they go for a protest, our whole plant's shut down. So that whole partnership with the communities and embracing transformation, it is quite a key enabler for us. It's something that we really are going to do and do much better in time.
I mean, that's a very real example. Kobus?
I think, Derek, putting the perspective on diversity and inclusivity, so as the end game, so because we can talk about transformation or BE, but for me, if we think about the outcome, which we're trying to achieve, specifically in South Africa, but I think that's a global phenomenon, is that a diverse and inclusive organization is a stronger organization. Therefore, everything around it in its value chain. And I'm also going to jump to what's the next big thing. I think the next big thing is having those millennials, young people, which are much more diverse, much more inclusive, much less inclined to do repetitive work, them actually changing our world. And in South Africa, bringing the talent from across all our communities, truly representative, into our world, will change us. It will make us think different, because you'll move away from what we've learned how it should work. Our biggest enemy is that we want to do it the way it worked yesterday, because a lot of us comes from operations. That's what operations people do. So diversity and inclusivity in South Africa has much more potential than it has threat. But then you have that perspective, is that having different people in the room, clients, suppliers, inside the organization, makes everybody stronger, because you have more views, more perspectives, and you actually challenge yourself to improve. So I think that's an important
So that's
perspective
the
to have.
next, well, and I mean, it's happening already, isn't it, with millennials, isn't it? Bronwyn, you knew this question was coming up. What is your input?
Which question was that? The one
The next big
thing?
Yeah, next big thing.
I really think the next big thing is the next wave of consumers, the millennials. I think that they are going to bring to a workforce a really fresh perspective of what the world needs to be in everything that it encompasses. So sustainability for people, community, making your local community richer. They're more responsible around their world. They've the most highly educated generation we've ever had. They're the most diverse generation we ever had, and they're the least employable, because they're coming to a workforce where we've just gone through this horrible recession. And that, for me, is the saddest thing. And I think in supply chain, we have so many functions across supply chain, and they are all an apprenticed function. You could run beautiful apprentice programs and think about apprentice not like we did when we left school, but really as something different and fresh. And I think that's the next big thing. I think if we embrace that group of people, we will survive.
And I think particularly for Africa, right? I mean, if you take a look at in the next 20 years, the average age of the employable African worker is going to be less than 25.
Yeah.
So when you really think about that, and it goes back to broadening the definition of sustainability. Sustainability is not, I mean, the green aspect is a huge component, and they shouldn't sit divergent efforts. But the reality of it is, I think one of the biggest challenges is we have a young workforce, we have a younger consumer, et cetera. The reality is we have to keep speed with skills and competencies, right? We have to be sure that we are making every effort to make sure our companies are sustainable, because we have a competitive workforce that is properly trained for the job that they need to do. And that's not, that is a huge challenge for us. So what I love about this community is really the thought-provoking aspect of, let's make sure we understand how we want to train our people. And what are going to, and we don't know all the answers, right, as Sean just said. We don't know the jobs of the future necessarily, but we know the principal aspects of the education requirements to make someone successful for the future. So when we need to think about allowing people to become interested in data scientist kind of activities, we need to train people on analytics. We don't necessarily know the job they're going to have, but there are some fundamentals that we can build into our education systems to make sure the skills and competencies are there, and that we are sustainable as an organization.
Steve,
Good one.
from Boeing's side, or just generally
So
that?
Just kind of taking a little bit of a different direction. I think the other part that we tend not to talk to is the infrastructure gap that we have today. So, and I wouldn't say this is the next disruptive change, but even in the U.S., the infrastructure that we have will not keep up with the rate of disruptive change that we see in industry. And in South Africa, I think it's a very, very similar challenge in terms of how do you get to the ability to create economics, industry here with the infrastructure to support it, with the interior infrastructure to support it, with the energy infrastructure. There's still another energy challenge that we're going to face, and I think that we're not, if we're being honest with ourselves, it's probably on the horizon. And I think that getting our heads around how we will, and this is where we're talking about this as Apex, how do we start to influence governmental organizations around driving infrastructure change? Because without that, we're not going to see all of this enlightened future without driving some of that change as well. So it's not nearly as sexy or as disruptive. I think it is a disruptor to our progress, is our ability to drive the development of infrastructure.
Well, that's a sensitive point, driving government institutions at Paul.
Definitely a very contentious point. But I think government is open to partnerships. But it just depends at what level of partnership you're pushing to them. One of my biggest suppliers is Transnet. I rely on Transnet to move product on the pipelines, to move product out of the country through the ports. It takes me too long just to move product. My supply chain is extended. So if they could invest more in facilities, invest more in the port infrastructure, it would actually shorten my supply chain timelines. But however, it's a partnership. So this whole thing around stakeholder management, engagement, must happen across all levels. CE to CE, VP to VP, operator to operator. It needs to be zipped up, because that's how you can actually influence that partnership as well.
Bradley, your thoughts on this?
Derek, in terms of the next big thing in supply chain, if you follow on the theme of a fast-changing business environment and disruption, and in the supply chain world, we spoke about the transition from a view of us as the cost center to an enabling partner. I think the next big thing for us is that there will be a transformation in that entry-level role in your organizations. We will look at that roles very differently, and I think from a skills point of view and the value of those roles going forward into the future. Because what we're talking about here is all of us being challenged, and as we undertake that transformation, we're going to retool ourselves. Yes. We're going to retool ourselves, we're going to reorganize ourselves, and if we want to be perceived as that enabling partner, certainly we should be perceiving the roles within our organizations, particularly the ones right at the bottom, somewhat differently. Yes. And I think that's the next big thing from my perspective.
We've got a couple of minutes to wrap up. Predictions and pitfalls going into the next 2 years or beyond, if you see something beyond that. But really, what is dynamically important? Should we go around the table? Well, not quite the table. Bronwyn?
Got to make decisions faster. This red tape of let's have a board meeting in 6 months' time to decide something now can't happen anymore.
Quicker decisions.
We have to be able to make quicker decisions.
But I just see that in so many things. I mean, we were talking about Elon Musk. Yeah, and I'm not just dropping names here, because Prince Charles told me that it lacks class if you drop names. But I went to his rocket factory. It's obviously developed since then, but he was building the rockets, and it was open to the road. And I mean, I've been through I've been through NASA, and I've been through all the people who make the engines, and you have to get into dust coats, sign, non-disclosures. There you just walked in. And one of my first questions was, how can you be building rockets when you've got no security? It's just open, from the road. That's the way it was. And he said, you know what, and no offense, because he mentioned Boeing. He said, I could give the plans to Boeing, to Ariane Space, the blueprints, I could give them to them today. and they'd still be 10 years behind because of all the red tape. Sorry, Steve, that's... I'm sure it's changed since then because this was about 8 years ago. But I mean, but his point was right. I mean, and nothing personal about that, Steve, because I think things have changed. But Elon just went in, stopped the red tape, and look what he's done. So is that a great point? And what are your things about predictions for the future?
No, I completely agree with that. So there's two dimensions, I think, to it. One is that structure of the organization and flattening out the organization, driving to more horizontal kind of decision making. The second part of it is, I think, part of this is even the system thinking we use today is in the paradox of the ERP and the paradox of the SAP, Oracle, kind of the boxes we've been knit into. So the idea that we can, one, think differently, use different tools, act differently, and there is the challenge of figuring out how, including large bureaucratic organizations like Boeing, how do you bring decisions down to the lowest level and take the bureaucracy out of the organization?
And how do you do it, Doug?
Oh gosh, if I
With
had that
difficulty.
answer, I wouldn't be sitting up here. Well, I think, so if we just go back, what keeps you up at night, right? So the things we know that we need to do, the adoption of technology, the better use of our data, the higher degree of collaboration, that's not what keeps me up at night. This afternoon, I'll be talking about the political environment and the impacts of that on our supply chain. That's what scares the heck out of me, because in an instant, dare I say, we might be a tweet away from disaster, but in an instant, the whole of, for those of you who are importing and exporting, the whole of your world can change overnight. So if there's a decision to blow up NAFTA, if there's a pullout of this, the tariff, trade, tax impacts on our supply chain, for those who have a physical footprint, this is the unknown. I can manage the known, it's the unknown which is concerning, and we'll talk about that later. But that's the thing that I think could be potentially really disruptive, because we have a path we go forward with, we have a physical footprint we think is tax efficient, et cetera, and that could change overnight.
And it's a good promo for your talk later, so don't miss it.
Absolutely, 2:30 this afternoon. Paul
Okay, Tsepo, red tape. Well, we got into red tape, but it's really just predictions for the future.
Yeah, I think from my side, my end point would be let's keep doing things right. In terms of governance, compliance, make sure we all above board, that's one. But doing things right also necessitates that we must do the right things for the business, for supply chain as well. And I think now is not the time for us to actually feel, what's the word I'm looking for? Feel despondent.
Or threatened.
Yeah, or threatened. I think there's opportunity right now. We do see the sea of change coming. I think we need to quickly adapt and make sure we choose the fit-for-purpose solutions to enable our supply chains.
Thanks, Tsepo. And Bradley, last words?
Derek, I'd like to think that that we can help shape that future, as opposed to it coming towards us and us having no control over it. And certainly from an African perspective, we heard about the low average age of Africans in the future. I think it gives us great opportunity. And that talks to me about what we do with our people, how we organize ourselves. And I think certainly from a more strategic perspective, that all of us will be spending more of our resource thinking about tomorrow, as opposed to spending the bulk of what we do on operating processes or the transactional stuff. Now, the transactional stuff have to be there because that's our ticket to the match, and I'm not taking anything away from that, but there's certainly a reorientation and thinking about reskilling our people and spending some of that money thinking about tomorrow, what we want to do tomorrow, and how we're shaping that future for ourselves.
Right, cool. It's you've got the responsibility of summing this all up. Is it a case of having everything working perfectly at the moment, but always keeping your eye on the future? Is that what it's about?
Yeah, I'm not even going to try to do that. So I'd rather use the closing opportunity to punt SAPEX and actually say from the side here, Bronwyn made the point about networking. What I think is the future, the prediction is that SAPEX would continue to actually add value to this. Bronwyn made the point about the networks, but the beauty here, and I think it's distinctly different to many places in the world, is that we have different value chains talking to each other about the same problem. where often you could end up with a consumer group and a farmer group that is a community that people are cross being employed in. And I think the opportunity to talk to others and realize that you're not alone, the opportunity to educate your people, and Mango spoke this morning about the different certifications, but also the opportunity to engage with young people. And from a SAPEX point of view, lots of focus on young professionals. So yeah, I think it's great to have everybody here, but it's also our continued effort to actually build this supply chain community and make the real difference in all these aspects that the experts have spoken about.
Well, thanks so much, Bronwyn, Steve, Doug, Seppo, Bradley, Kobus. I think we must give you a huge round of applause. Thank you so much for your interaction. And I feel I've learned so much, I really have, because my boss has been trying to replace me with a robot for some time, but he can't find one that grovels, so it's a big problem. Thanks just to Imperial for making this possible. I really appreciate Imperial Logistics. Thanks to all the delegates for your participation. Enjoy the rest of SAPEX 2017 and have a magic week, and cheers for now. Thank you. Thanks.